Do you think that we have organizations that can not only just embrace AI, but also power the decisions and the customer experience based on self-improvising algorithms? Well, our next session that's just in a way would delve into and would spotlight how organizations can boost the AI adoption and achieve their business transformation goals using the power of data science. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, our speaker this time has also flown in virtually crossing the skies. He is a sincere statesman and a wise one. Let's lend our ears to Joyce L. Myers, the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, U.S. Army Aviation and Missile Command. I give to you him.
Hello, my name is Joyce Myers. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer with the United States Army Aviation and Missile Command. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today, and thank you to the Economic Times Edge for inviting me to do so. Today we're going to talk a little bit about change. Not that change is something people want to talk about. And we're going to make it a little bit more interesting by we're going to talk about how to accelerate change. How do we move towards a more interconnected, data-driven world through change and be successful with that? How do we interact with the people we work with, both internal and external to our organization, to positively affect change, not for the sake of change, but for the sake of value to our organization and our organization's business propositions? How do we do that? Well, the first thing in change is something different than what we're used to. So we don't want change just for the sake of change. There has to be a true value, not just a financial value, not just to the bottom line, although that's very important when you're looking at it from a business aspect. But how does that change truly resonate with your workforce? If we want to be an interconnected world, we can connect through cable, through fiber, through the internet, through satellite, and then we can be interconnected easy. But if we don't truly connect at the personal level, if we don't connect within each business area of our organizations and truly obtain the buy-in from our workforce, then that change, that acceleration of change towards an overarching culture, a data-driven culture, is not really going to happen. So how do we do that? Well, first we know that there are multiple business processes at all levels of our organizations. There are business processes that occur in the top level, in the C-suite, at the executive level, and there are business processes that occur at middle management as well as down at all levels within the organization. Now, many of those processes have been in place for years, decades even, and nobody really truly understands why they were put in place to begin with. So one of the very first steps towards accelerating change is truly understanding your business. Why are we doing the things that we're doing? Should we be doing these things? And are they bringing value to our business model today? And how do we use data to understand whether or not the change we're choosing to implement is really the change we need? Perhaps when we look at the bigger picture, when we look at the processes from a business perspective, we bring the people in who own and are responsible for those business processes, then we can start to make those changes. Now, as we want to move forward to this, data is the word that we hear everywhere. A data-driven world, a data-informed world, data-driven decisions, data this, data that. You can't open an article, a newspaper or a publication anywhere without seeing the word data. And if you're participating in this event, then you have a vested interest in data and how it impacts our world. So data is a separate entity from the people. However, we use data every day in our lives, whether we know that we're doing it or not. When we use our phones and we pull up our contacts, when we log into the internet to search for something or to shop for something, when we enter into our television and we're looking for a movie to watch. All of that is data-driven and helps us drive our decisions. So if we look at it from a business perspective, and we are the consumer of our greater business output, what is it that we're trying to do? Well, we said earlier that people are very tied and emotionally attached to their processes and their inputs or outputs. So how do we accelerate, again, that change? Well, we bring the people to the table and we ask them, what is working? What is not working? Where are your sticking points? Have you ever, as an employee, said, if only it worked like this? I wish it worked like that. Man, this doesn't work the way I wished it had. I hope that we can change this one day. Any of those types of statements are an opportunity to begin that discussion with your workforce. So it's very important that we take that time. And it seems like it's a backward step, right? It doesn't seem like it would be acceleration because we're taking that backward step. But really what we're trying to do is lay that foundation. And we know that as we've reached those higher levels within our organization, as we've worked from fresh out of college, if we may, fresh out of the university, and we're coming into our first job all the way through, maybe we're a very seasoned or senior employee. We all have those issues with the process within our organization that we would say, if only we could do it this way, or I wish this worked more smoothly. If we enter into those conversations, not just at the manager or leader level, but truly in the workforce level, and we start to get an idea for those key areas where there are some sticking points, maybe, just maybe, those are the areas we could focus on. But maybe not in and only of itself. Perhaps what we'd like to do is take the combination of the input from the people for those ideas where they would like things to be changed, as well as from a leadership perspective. Now, we understand that our businesses drive our day-to-day. So from a leadership perspective, what are those key metrics? What are those parameters, those metrics, those key performance indicators that we need to measure to ensure that we're successful? And how do we get there? Well, you're not going to get there immediately. You're not going to successfully all of a sudden magically become a data-driven organization just because it's the buzzword of the day or because we've decided that that's going to be our new mission statement. You have to lay the foundation. So as rapidly as we hope to get to an interconnected and data-driven world, as rapidly as we hope to declare victory on we are a data organization, we truly can't become an effective data organization without the people. So understanding where the people are coming from, understanding their roles within the processes, understanding the sticking points that the individual employees have at all levels will help us as leaders come together and say, this is the problem we should be solving. These are the areas where we can learn to do things better. That gives us a starting point. When we look at our organization as an entirety, it's oftentimes hard to narrow that down to where we should really be focusing. And as you can imagine, there is an enormous amount of data available about every process out there. And so how do we know which data that we need to use and focus on? So getting that input from our leadership as well as getting input from the workforce at different levels will help us bring that together. So these will be data points, right? Some of it may be structured data and some of it may be unstructured. In the beginning, we'll be coming with opinions and thoughts, ideas tied towards existing business processes. So we're going to start with some unstructured data that maybe doesn't really have a lot of validity just on the surface. It looks as though it's just a personal opinion. But when we start to take those viewpoints and those opinions and we start to tie them together and look at, is that a process that is something that touches the organization as a whole? Is it only a process that touches this one small center within an organization? Does it touch 4 people or 400 people? And we can start to see what the ripple effect may be from that one idea. If we were to fix one tiny little process based on this unstructured data, this opinion, if you will, then we have now started to show that there is an intent and a willingness to listen to our workforce. receive their input, and help to make things better. By doing that with some of the smaller processes, for some of the smaller areas where there are sticking points, what we've done is we've started to create this culture. So we've all heard about, well, we need to change the culture. Well, maybe the culture is fine. Maybe the culture is not a horrible culture, but maybe we need to just tweak it a little bit, or maybe create a new level of culture where people feel as though their data, their input, related to how we're going to measure ourselves, related to the data. So for example, if you are an organization that sells a product, we know that you want to be in the profit-making business. You want to sell more product than you make so that you can bring money in. So if you're not creating a profit base, then it is somewhere in your data set where you can start to identify where those issues are. Do we pull up large spreadsheets, large databases, and we just start crunching numbers? Well, that's a method, and people do that. Or do we talk to the people and say, hey, where would you have an idea? Where do you think this is wrong? Now, obviously, not every opinion and not every person, we can't bring the entire workforce to the table. But as leaders and managers, we're going to know, as the data scientists and data engineers, the people who own the processes, we have a good idea of where we could make some improvements. We need to be willing to have the fortitude to say that in a way that's professional, but we also have to be willing to receive that input if somebody has brought that information to us. And that will start to lay that foundation of change. And we're starting to build the connection as well, the connection between the people. And once we can connect the people and the processes together, we can really start to look at that underlying data. So, for example, going back to the I have a goods for sale and I am attempting to make a profit, and yet every year we're losing ground and we're not making as much profit. Well, this is where we can start to look in our data that perhaps maybe we're not marketing in a timely fashion. Perhaps our sale flyers are coming out after the sale has already happened. And we start to look at the release dates of things like that, or the information tied to the data, tied to that particular piece of the process, and we can start to see how that connects. So now not only are we connecting the people within the organization, helping build that culture, helping create that new culture, we're including the people with the processes they own, listening to some of the issues that perhaps we've identified at all levels of the workforce, and then using the underlying data directly tied to the inputs and outputs of that specific process to help identify and question, why is it doing this? What are we doing differently this year than we did last year? Who is involved in this process? Are the right people involved? And when we start to ask those questions, the data is going to be there to answer it. If the data is not there, then that's maybe where we have a missing connection. Maybe we're missing a data set. Maybe our data isn't current. Maybe we're using the wrong data source. So as we start to connect and interconnect in our world, both people, business, now we start to see where that data underlies all the way there. And we want to make sure that we're connecting our data appropriately as well. When we want to say, and we choose to say, we are a data-driven organization or we're a data-driven world, we already are. We maybe just aren't understanding that we are, but we could always do better. And it is up to us to look internally in our own businesses, even in our own sections within a business. So you may not be the CEO or the chief financial officer. You may not be in charge of anyone. You may not even be in a supervisory role. But in the role you are, you have a direct impact on being connected to the people to your left and right, inside and outside of your organization, and connected in your processes. You also have a direct connection to the data that you generate. Whether you ever see the downstream impacts If you're typing something into a keyboard on a system in your organization, you are creating data in a process. If you are receiving a report or going into a database, if you're running an SQL query, or you're managing Excel or Access, if you're doing any of these things, running R or Python, if you're doing any of this analytics, you have a database role. You're already more connected than you may ever realize. So accelerating change is really an interesting idea because we are already changing every single day. Change is amongst us so fast that sometimes we don't even realize it changed. But then again, there are those instances where we're like, stop, no, I'm not changing, I want it just the way it is. So I challenge you to take a moment, take a step back, and look at the processes that you personally are responsible for in your organization. Look at who you're connected to left and right as a stakeholder, as an actor in that process, as an owner of that process. Then I challenge you to look at the data that's going into and out of your processes and looking how that's connected. And start asking yourself those questions. Do we use this data? Why are we using this data? What questions are we answering with this data? How can we do better using this data? How do we take the data that we're creating or consuming from another process to help drive our decisions? And when and only when we are able to connect as people to our processes, to the data that supports our process, will we truly be able to understand and become part of that data-driven world. We have that power within us. We don't have to be resistant to change. We actually own our own change. We just have to be willing to embrace it. Thank you so very much for your time this evening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference.